child's strengths are and how their disability might have a positive aspect. So moving on to the next bit, what disables me? So if we're thinking in terms of the social model, we are trying to understand that it's not just your body. If we're thinking of the biosocial model, it's not just the stuff that's happening in your body, it's not just your disability, it's your surrounding. So I said earlier with the multiple chemical sensitivity, some of the things that I have a sensory reaction to that I get overwhelmed with, stuff like sprays and bleach. So I am disabled by people who overclean. I am disabled by people who spray half the can when there's a fly. That is a struggle for me. One of the other things that disables me is bright lights. So if I'm in a room and it is just too bright, that is actually disabling for me. I love being in a room where it's dim. I love rooms that have dimmers so that you can just not turn the light off but just dim the light a bit. And of course, something that disables me is not having my glasses sometimes. But the thing about fibromyalgia is that some days you notice it, some days you don't. So there are days where I don't even need these. Another thing that disables me, and this is a pet hate when I walk into classrooms, are the way that classrooms are designed and the furniture in buildings. Because there are certain pieces of furniture that just stump me. So when I walk into a classroom, I hate this kind of setup in a classroom because with my fibromyalgia and the way I function, I am not very, I'm very clumsy and I don't have a very good sense of how close I am to different objects, and I bump into stuff all the time. And I hate this setup because if I were in a classroom like this, I would always be bumping into the tables and I'd always be tripping over and I'd always be getting stuck. So that's one thing that disables me. Another thing that disables me is the type of chairs and stools. I was teaching in one classroom as a casual, and the teacher didn't have any chairs in the class. They just had all these wobble stools because they had a lot of students with ADHD, and these are brilliant for students with ADHD. They are not brilliant for people that have a physical disability. It was really painful to try to sit on these chairs because I was trying to balance and I'm having to use my knees, which are all creaky and arthritic, and it was hell. And I do not like rooms that have these sorts of wobbly stools that you have to balance because I don't have a good sense of balance at all. And then finally, classrooms that have stairs. There are days where I'm like, if I have to climb one more stair, I swear, I'm done. And it can be really frustrating. I much more prefer elevators and I much more prefer ramps. And that is something that can disable me. Then finally, cooling systems, funnily enough. So when it comes to heat and temperature, I am actually disabled when things are too cold. So I don't like being right in front of the fan. I don't like being right in front of the air conditioner. I love the heat. So those are different things in the classroom that might disable me. So when you've got a student with a disability like autism or ADHD or a physical disability, one of the things you have to consider is what disables this student. Do bright lights disable this student? Does the furniture disable this student? What makes it hard for this student to function in my classroom? It also works for people without disabilities. If you've got someone from a different culture in your classroom, what disables that student? What stops them from functioning? If you're using Australian slang all the time and they don't know what you're talking about, that's actually disabling them. So think about all of the students. What is it that disables the boys in your class? What is it that disables the girls in your class? I've been in some classrooms where the lesson is very girly or very masculine, and it's like half of the class are kind of just switch off because of the nature of the class. So we need to think about what are barriers and what disables the people in your class. Now, on the other hand, there are things that remove disability. One of the things that removes disability for me is heat. So I love heaters. I love heating packs and bean bags. They're awesome. One of the things that I have in my classroom is I actually have blankets. So if there are students who are disabled by the cold, get a blanket. And there are days where I am feeling it in the classroom and I'll just get a blanket on and put a blanket over my knees. And I'm like, this helps me function better. This helps me teach better. And this helps you learn better. So one of the things that enables me, that removes my disability, is heat. Another thing that enables or removes my disability is ergonomic furniture. So I love chairs that have a high back in them, chairs that are comfortable. I really also love chairs that have wheels on them because sometimes I just don't want to have to stand up and move around because it's painful and it's hard. Sometimes it is so much easier just to move myself over in the chair. I've got a student that has cerebral palsy, and she's talked about the same thing, about how she personally loves a chair with wheels on it because instead of walking around the class, sometimes she can just shuffle over she's next to the teacher's desk, so she can just shuffle over to the teacher's desk, and that's just easier for her. So I quite love ergonomic furniture. I talked about light dimmers earlier. I got ahead of myself. I do that sometimes. I love light dimmers because I function really well when there's less light in the room. And this is something that could be tricky because if you have a deaf student in your class who is trying to read the teacher's lips, darkness is not a good thing. They might need more light. They might need more brightness. So we also have to think about the least restrictive environment. What is going to be the least restrictive environment for people in your class? Dimming the lights or having a really bright room? I've had to change it up as I've been teaching. There was one year that I had a class where I had heaps of students that had mental health issues, lots of students that had depression. And so that year, I had to, because the year before I'd had a lot of students with autism. So the year with autism, I had the blinds up and the lights out. So we got natural light coming into the room so that removed the disability of the synthetic light for the kids with autism. But when I had the next year and I had all these students with mental health difficulties and barely any autistic students, we went the complete opposite way. We coloured in the windows in all kinds of bright pink and yellow and green and blue, all sorts of bright colours to brighten the room up to have a happy atmosphere because being in a dark room was not good for people with mental health issues. So sometimes you have to think about what is the least restrictive environment for my class. The last thing that I really love is class design. So I love shoehorn classes because there's nothing to bump into for me. I love being able to go to everyone in the class and be able to move around in the middle and get everyone talking to each other. This is another alternative. This one is where you have middle and you have people kind of facing different directions. Some students with autism really love having these sort of barricades because they take in so much sensory information. They like having a barricade to kind of block out the extra information. I personally like that as well. But I do like this kind of setup because I can be in my wheelie chair, I can access everyone in the room without having to stand up, or vice versa, I can ask them to come to me. I also like it because I can move around and see everyone and give people different options. There are people who can get direct instruction from the front, there are people who can work in a group in the middle, So this is what I really like. So that is something that removes my disability. So I'm hoping that by talking about it in this way, that I'm helping you to understand the difference between the medical and the social model. Because if we think in terms of the social model, we are actually, as teachers, we're actually in the practice of healing. We can actually remove barriers for people and remove disabilities for people by thinking about what disables this student. One of the things for me as well is this idea of invisible disabilities. So fibromyalgia is an invisible disability. So I think I might start by looking at this video of invisible disability. This is a person with a physical disability, and she just explains what an invisible disability is. So basically, an invisible disability